Welcome back, folks. Today we're talking about what's happening in southern Lebanon because I believe most people aren't aware of the scale of the war crimes that Israel is perpetuating in the region and how closely it all mirrors what they already did in Gaza. Now, right now, the Israeli military is carrying out sustained airstrikes across southern Lebanon, claiming they are targeting Hezbollah. And that is a justification being used publicly, very similar to the justification for what they did in Gaza. They said they were taking out Hamas. But when you actually look at the footage in the aftermath, what you're seeing is not isolated, precise strikes. You're seeing entire villages being leveled. In fact, the United Nations has already described what's happening as indiscriminate bombing, and the images coming out of Lebanon look almost identical to what we saw in Gaza. Collapsed buildings, flattened neighborhoods, and civilian infrastructure destroyed at scale. And that's the first thing people need to clearly understand, because this is not just targeted military action. This is large-scale destruction across civilian areas. Now, all of you said, I do have to be open about something. When it comes to Gaza, I got that completely wrong. Initially, I looked at what the Israeli government and Israeli military were doing in that region through a political lens. I got caught up in the narratives. I got pulled into the propaganda, and I treated what Israel was doing in Gaza as a right versus left issue. It took me time to step back and actually understand the scale of the destruction and how the Israeli government used the horrific events of October 7th. And I do want to be clear, what happened on October 7th was awful, to justify what I believe became an ethnic cleansing and mass killing campaign carried out by the Israeli military in Gaza, not just framed around immediate security, but tied to long-term control and reshaping that region in a way that solely benefits Israel. And that's why watching what's currently playing out in Lebanon hits even harder, because I was initially hesitant to see what was happening in Gaza for what it was. I wrongfully thought that the whole conversation around Gaza was just a bunch of deranged leftists pushing a narrative that wasn't really commensurate with reality. But now I see what happened in Gaza as well as what's currently happening in Lebanon. And these are images from Lebanon. They look just like Gaza. But I see all this as a strategy the Israeli military is using to achieve its broader territorial goals. The expansion of their state from the Euphrates to the Nile, something that gets talked about a lot, the Greater Israel Project. And indeed, what we're witnessing becomes an undeniable confirmation that those quote-unquote theories are in fact reality, and that as Americans, we should be questioning what kind of role we want to play in this imperialistic effort by Israel. Do we want to continue funding these genocides, these ethnic cleansings, these bombing of villages? Do we want to keep giving them weapons to keep perpetuating these war crimes in the region? What do we want to do? Because we are seeing Gaza-style tactics be used in Lebanon, like double tap strikes, where an area is hit once and then hit again when rescuers and civilians come in to help those injured. And in one documented case, rescue workers were killed while trying to pull people out of a rubble. And that's not incidental. That's not some one-off mistake. That's a pattern that has been observed for years at this point. But it doesn't stop there, because when you zoom out and look at the broader picture, the level of destruction itself is not random either. We're talking about entire towns being flattened, infrastructure being wiped out, as we were just watching in videos, and multiple analyses pointing to what looks like a deliberate effort to make parts of southern Lebanon completely uninhabitable. Because when you destroy homes, water systems, farms, schools, and basic infrastructure, you're not just targeting a militant group, you're not just targeting Hezbollah, you're collapsing the conditions required for civilian life. And once you understand that that's actually the goal, everything else about the Israeli military action in the region starts to come into focus. Because right now, when you look at it, over 1.2 million people in southern Lebanon are facing acute hunger as a direct result of this conflict. This according to a United Nations report. Now, before the war escalated in March, that number was around 874,000. So this is a massive jump in a short amount of time, and it shows a system breaking down in real time as a result of the Israeli military's actions, which makes it evident that this kind of warfare doesn't just target buildings. It is meant to literally destroy supply chains, agriculture, local and civilian infrastructure, and the basic ability for people to survive day to day. This is a humanitarian crisis. This is starvation caused on the people in order to break down the country and cause it to succumb to your will. And that's why this goes beyond a military conflict. This is a humanitarian collapse. This is a humanitarian crisis. And what makes it even more absurd is that all of this is happening during what is supposed to be a ceasefire. See, there was a U.S. brokered agreement starting on April 16th, just a few days ago, that was meant to pause hostilities between Israel and Lebanon and allow negotiations. But in reality, the Israeli strikes continued. In fact, Israel broke the ceasefire about 40 minutes after it was put into place. So needless to say, people are still getting killed and the bombing has not stopped. The agreement itself includes a self-defense clause, which in practice allows Israel to continue operations whenever it chooses. So the ceasefire exists on paper, but not so much on the ground. And perhaps that's by design. We're talking entire towns and villages in Lebanon getting completely wiped out under the guise of removing Hezbollah, all while Benjamin Netanyahu is still going around claiming that they're taking out Hezbollah tunnels, a similar narrative to what they claimed they were doing with Hamas in Gaza. See how these situations mirror each other? Which is why Christians should be skeptical of the appeals they're constantly and intentionally receiving from figures like Netanyahu and other figures in the Israeli government, constantly appealing to Christians, talking about how they love Christians, Christians are respected in Israel. These villages getting blown out in Lebanon, like the one that we're watching right now, are primarily Christian villages. As we saw just a few days ago, there was a picture of an IDF soldier destroying a statue of Christ. We also saw a video that documented how Israeli soldiers had completely defiled and destroyed a church in a village of 8 people. So when, as a Christian, you are regularly being appealed to, and as though Israel is aligned with Christian interests, but when you actually look at what's happening on the ground, especially in these highly populated Christian areas, those communities are being hit just like everyone else. How is that alignment? They're not being spared of the destruction. They're dealing with the same instability, the same violence, the same collapse of infrastructure, the same brutality and lack of empathy and disrespect for our faith. So with that in mind, the rhetoric from the Israeli government and the reality of what they're actually perpetuating on the ground doesn't match. And that matters because it shows how this game is duplicitous. The Israeli government will make a claim and appeal to you while going out and doing the complete opposite. Even going as far as to use excavators to destroy civilian infrastructure like solar panels. You tell me how destroying solar panels is going to get Hezbollah in what looks like somebody's backyard. And by the way, the IDF announced that they were investigating this incident, and very similar to the situation where the soldier was crushing the image of Jesus Christ, they said that these actions don't align with their values. Funny how often actions are taken by their soldiers that don't align with their values. That really makes you start thinking, what weighs more, actions or words? I don't know. You tell me, folks. And by the way, it should be noted that this isn't just about villages and civilian infrastructure being destroyed. Holy sites, Christian holy sites are being hit as well. It was reported earlier today that the Israeli military destroyed the mausoleum of St. Simon Peter, an apostle of Christ, in the village of Shammah in southern Lebanon. This site was an ancient site, estimated to being nearly 2,000 years old. Not only that, we've talked at length about how Christians have been treated in Jerusalem, targeted in Jerusalem and across Israel. We've discussed incidents where Christians are harassed in public, spit on by Orthodox Jews as they walk by, and ongoing efforts to restrict proselytizing or even openly speaking about Jesus Christ in the streets of Jerusalem and Israel, which, by the way, Jerusalem is a holy site for Christians. And now we're seeing even more reports that raise serious concerns. There was an incident in Jerusalem where a nun was violently attacked near the tomb of King David. Authorities have charged it as a racially motivated attack, while the director of her institute described it as sectarian violence. The suspect, a 36-year-old man, has been arrested, but when you look at this alongside the destruction of Christian villages in Lebanon and everything else we've been discussing in the past few days, what they did in Gaza, it contributes to a broader pattern of rising tensions and violence affecting most non-Jewish communities in the region. We're speaking here specifically about Christian communities, but Muslim communities are being targeted as well, which raises another question. Considering the direction we're heading, when is this going to stop? What is the end game? All that being said, if you find yourself where I was during the Gaza genocide, I'm asking you to take a step back and re-examine the evidence. Look at what's actually happening on the ground right before our eyes. It is playing out in real time. These patterns are happening in this specific way for a reason, and none of this is unprecedented for the Israeli army. This isn't outside of the scope of what we've seen them do before. At some point, we have to recognize the weight we carry as Americans, because we are financially, militarily, and politically supporting the actions of a government that is, in my view, responsible for mass atrocities, that being loss of life at a huge scale, starvation, the loss of country, the destruction of human heritage, including Christian and Muslim heritage in that region. There comes a point where we have to say enough is enough. Our politicians are compromised. Our national priorities are inverted. We are focused on foreign policy while ignoring what's happening at home in America. We need to get our act together. And we need to start demanding accountability from our leaders in government, in media, and across the board, because right now we're backing an ethno-terrorist state that appears willing to destroy the lives of its neighbors in pursuit of its imperialistic goals. And that's not sustainable. That's not moral. And if you have any concern for human life, you have to start questioning the actions of the Israeli state. Anyway, folks, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.